Well, welcome to this African Studies seminar afternoon with a distinguished speaker. I'm very pleased and honored that we are able to introduce you, Professor Adeline Masquelier from the Tulane University in the US. She's a prolific writer. I'm sure many of you already know a lot of her work. She's been researching for many years issues relating to the Islamic world in Niger, issues of spirit possession, the position of young people in Niger. She will also address this issue in this afternoon's lecture on girls' education in Niger. One of her writings is also related to the issue of boredom that some of you might find of interest in the reading. So it's with a great pleasure that we would like to welcome Professor Masquelier and invite her to present to us her talk for this afternoon on the girls' education. She will speak for a little over half an hour, and then there will be ample room for Q&A after that, also from the ones who might join us online. And I would also like to welcome those who are there via our system, as it is called. So please take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to listen to this lecture. And first, I want to thank the African Study Center for inviting me. Thank you to Rick, especially for organizing my trip and answering my multiple questions. So without further ado, the call to invest in girls' education worldwide has been sweeping the development field in recent years. Ever since achieving universal primary education became a cornerstone of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, girls have enjoyed unprecedented attention from international development institutions and other actors seeking to eliminate gender discrimination. At a time of ever-growing reliance on market-driven models of development, the impetus behind this goal, this global turn to girls, can be summarized as follows. Aside from being a moral obligation, girls' education is a profitable investment because an educated woman is widely assumed to be a capable actor who contributes to society through her labor and her entrepreneurial spirit. Put more crudely, sending girls to school is not only good for girls, it is also good for the economy. Oops. Okay. In Niger, the world's least educated country, the push to widen girls' access to schooling has translated into sensitization campaigns, advocacy programs, and other interventions that package girls' education as the noblest of enterprises, with the potential to remake society from the bottom up. By protecting girls from so-called child marriage and other evils, schooling enables them to develop the skills that will eventually enable them to lift Niger out of poverty. Or so development workers, development actors, government representatives, and celebrity figures routinely claim in their address to the citizenry, as they urge parents to send girls to school, no matter the cost to the household. I want to tease out a fundamental contradiction embedded in the proposition that if poor, vulnerable girls are sent to school, they will not only save themselves, but also save their country. Let me begin with two vignettes, which I hope will set the stage for my discussion of how girls' education as a proxy for the feminization of responsibility is being harnessed for the benefit of corporate power. And I'm going to take a long-winded argument to get to the very end. So bear with me. First vignette. On the first day of the International Festival of African Fashion, or FIMA, held in Niamey, Niger's capital, in July 2019, Al-Fadi, the FIMA founder and one of Africa's most prominent fashion designers, made girls under 14 years of age walk in wedding dresses alongside men 4 times their age. He wanted to call attention to the problem of mariage précoce, early marriage, a practice humanitarian discourses have widely and uniformly condemned as a socially sanctioned form of sexual abuse. I dress women and girls to make them beautiful and value them, not to marry them at 13, Al-Fadi told a stunned audience. To give the continent, and here I'm quoting him, to give the continent a chance to grow, we need to educate girls. Preserving the future of the girl means preserving the future of the whole nation. And we need to give the girl the respect she deserves, he added. For Al-Fadi, who describes himself as a fierce advocate of children's rights, the future of Africa, and Niger in particular, rested on the shoulders of the girl child, provided she was not married off at an early age. Now, vignette number 2. During a 2019 community forum aimed at promoting girls' education, Dr. Félicité Chinbina, the UNICEF representative in Niger, told her audience that, quote, a girl who's denied education is more vulnerable to poverty, hunger, violence, abuse, exploitation, and maternal mortality, a legacy she risks transmitting to her children. The forum, one of many such events sponsored by UNICEF and the Norwegian government and supported by Dr. Malika Issoufou, former First Lady of Niger, was attended by community leaders, development actors, and members of local school management committees. A highlight of the event was a song performed by schoolgirls dressed in identical outfits, who gifted Madame Issoufou a slate inscribed with a message, "My place is in school," in white chalk on the screen. After underscoring the perils of illiteracy and the benefits of schooling, Chinbida concluded her address with these words. I have a message for you, speaking to the audience, from these girls. They say, we want to go to school and contribute to the development of our families, our communities, and our country. We want to be this nurse, this doctor who saves lives, this teacher who transmits knowledge, this entrepreneur who provides jobs for other youth, this inventor who participates in Itakara and become Miss Geek Africa, this artist who carries high the cultural flag of Niger. You have our future in your hands. You have our future in your hands. We are the hope and future of the country. Don't turn off the lights in our eyes. Don't quash our dreams. Don't abandon us. End of quote. Now, in these vignettes, girls are described as both vulnerable beings in need of protection and subjects imbued with unique potential, including the capacity to transform their country's fortunes. To protect girls from harmful practices such as early marriage, and at the same time unlock their unique capacities, parents must send daughters to school. In the first vignette, Al-Fadi stages a fashion show to denounce le mariage précoce. Niger, by the way, has the highest rate of early marriage. Roughly 75% of Nigerian girls are married before they turn 18, and about 50% of them are married before the age of 15, which is the country's legal age of marriage. And the importance attached to, of course, women's reproductive roles combined with the emphasis on female chastity for unmarried women frequently translates into shortened girlhood for female adolescents. So many girls experience youth as just a hiatus before the onset, between the onset of poverty and the advent of marriage. And of course, this is precisely this hiatus that girls' rights advocates, such as Alpha D, seek to extend by delaying marriage. Now, in this model of human progress, formal education, Boko in Hausa, the language that's spoken by a majority of Nigerians, is the means for both delaying marriage and grooming girls for the future. It safeguards and manages the girl's body in the formative interstitial moment between girlhood and womanhood, and thereby guaranteeing that girls don't grow up too fast. By offering a framework for age-appropriate learning activities, schools then ensure girls learn at the right pace. The goal, to paraphrase Alpha D, is to foster the potential stored in girls by letting them be girls for as long as possible. Now, in the second vignette, Chinbinda, the UNICEF representative, echoing Alpha D's words, paints girls as vulnerable to a host of threats that only schooling can protect them from. Implicit in her address is the image of the school as both the safe, carefree domain of childhood and the incubator for hatching future professional trajectories. Having appointed herself as a spokeswoman for a group of girls she met the day before in Dosso, one town in Niger, she tells her audience that these girls have big dreams and they want to be the next generation of Nigerian doctors, entrepreneurs, leaders, and so on. And she makes clear as well that only schooling can awaken that unique potential, which is nested in these girls. Now, in a way, it casts Niger's economic advancement as contingent on the education of its girl children. The messages Alpha D and Chimbinda convey to their respective audiences exemplify what Afra Kopman and Rosalind Gill call the girl powering of international development, a development logic driven by the notion that women in the global South are key instruments for alleviating poverty and energizing economies, relying on what Michelle Murphy calls anticipatory calculations of value that turn poor girls into successful entrepreneurs. This new blend of feminist aspirations and neoliberal economics deploys the concept of gender, not to scrutinize relations of gender as might be expected, but to create instead the girl as a particular category, a category so generic that it can stand for both universalized victim in needs of saving and the universal solution to world poverty. Now, solving poverty requires a kind of altruism that seems to be completely at odds with the self-centered subjectivity neoliberal narratives of female developments insist girls will develop in school. In other words, the model of womanhood these narratives promote hinges on a fundamental contradiction. On the one hand, girls are treated as typical neoliberal models of self-reliance and self-making. Future entrepreneurs focus on their own development and success. And on the other, they must sacrifice themselves for the common good. And it's precisely this contradiction in the vision of progressive futures peddled by development discourses that I want to scrutinize a bit through a focus on the instrumentalisation of education in Niger. And most of my research is done, most of my discussion is based on ethnographic research I conducted in Dogonduchi between 2013 and 2018, Dogonduchi being this small provincial Hausa-speaking town that's very close to the Nigerian border. First, a bit of background. In 1992, then World Bank chief economist Lawrence Summers penned a one-page essay in Scientific American. Oh, I wanted to show you. Okay, so this is the kind of image that you see a lot in Niger. Maman, je veux aller à l'école. Mom, I want to go to school. And here's a picture of Dogonduchi. In 92, Lawrence Summers penned a one-page essay in Scientific American in which he cast girls' education as the most effective way of ending poverty in the global south, advancing that educating girls quite possibly yields a higher rate of return than any other investments available in the developing world. He called for a major overhaul of the development agenda. The financial rewards of sending girls to school, he proclaimed, drawing from findings in comparative demography, could be measured in the number of maternal death, infant death, and births averted. In addition to making more money than their uneducated counterparts, educated women in low-income countries had fewer, healthier children. Moreover, their daughters were more likely to receive an education, and on and on and on. In fact, education enabled these women to break existing cycles of poverty and initiate instead what Summers called virtuous circles. Those are his terms. Given the high rates of return, investing in girls' education, he argued, was not only cheaper than investing in other development programs, including family planning, it was also cheaper than investing in boys' education. So there's this whole sort of crude, if you will, cost-benefit analysis of development, right? And at the center of it, there's the poor girl from the global south, her body turned into an iconic site of financial speculations. And it goes something like this. The longer she remains in school, the fewer children she's likely to bear, the more empowered she'll become, and the greater her chances of starting a business. The higher her earning power, the greater her contributions to her community and to the overall economy, and on and on. So what we have is this propped up against the classical neoliberal imaginaries of third world empowerment, we have this generic girl who's being repurposed as an instrument of poverty alleviation. And we just have to harness her capacities, right? And she'll not just pull her household out of poverty, she'll help the entire country. She becomes human capital. That is the term that economists and others at the World Bank notably use. So a previously untapped resource of tremendous potential for economic growth, provided, of course, she's not married too early. Okay, so at the time when the imposition of structural adjustment programs mandated by the World Bank and other institutions was gutting public education across the globe, this push for the economization of life set the stage for the widespread corporatization of girls' schooling, whereby corporate aspirations to do good and do well became inextricably entangled around the bodies of third world girls and women. So a whole sort of system where corporations are invited to invest in girls' education so that they're not just doing something good for the world, they'll get, high returns in the form of educated women who will create business and a whole new market where others, of course, can sell their stuff. So given the high rate of projected social and economic return, investing in girls' education made good sense for corporations looking to brand themselves as socially responsible while also creating new markets for their products. By appearing to respond to liberal feminists' call for gender equality, corporate giants like Nike, Starbucks, and Microsoft improved their public image, even as they framed girls as the new frontier for corporate profit. A widely circulated video produced in 2008 by the Nike Corporation to promote the Girl Effect, their newly created philanthropic brand provocatively suggests, let's put her in a school uniform and she will do the rest. With this and other memorable catchphrases, the Girl Effect proposed a radical approach to global development by locating the key to solving intractable poverty in 600 million of adolescent girls just waiting to be empowered. Sounds familiar by now? So here's some images you can find online of the Girl Effect. And I urge you to go and type Girl Effect video and you'll see the whole thing. It's absolutely fascinating. Though widely unrealistic, it's even to the point of being magical, right? It becomes magic. And vague to the point of vacuity, the scheme continues to attract capital by deploying its own version of what Ananya Royal calls neoliberal populism, a blend of free market ideology and interests in the bottom billion that ultimately recasts economic vulnerability as opportunity. Premised on a modernist version of desirable family size, this model of development welding together girls, fertility, and economic futures is now solidly entrenched amongst non-for-profit organizations advocating for gender equity and women's empowerment. As the World Bank, at the World Bank, a narrow single policy based on the schooling as contraception approach has justified the funding of a range of programs aiming at raising literacy and lowering fertility. And I worked as a World Bank consultant for a year on a project called Gender and Agency. And, you know, it became very, very clear to me after a few months that when we were talking about sending girls to school, we were actually trying to, the point was trying to have them have less babies. So since Summers first sounded the clarion call to empower girls about 30 years ago, the promotion of female education has become a thriving industry, bringing together activists, non-governmental organizations, national governments, global governance institutions, and transnational corporations. The girl is also one of the strategic priorities of the United Nations. Despite growing evidence that sending more girls to school alone won't reduce fertility, billions of dollars are channeled towards girls' education in the poorest country, along with a narrative about the potential nested in the third world girl that, once awakened, will put an end to underdevelopment. And a disclaimer, I'm obviously not against education, but this is a very interesting twist to the whole story about what education is about. And it's very clear that when they talk about education, they're counting the years. So, 6 years of education, she's going to be very empowered, right? And I think to myself, wow, when I graduated from high school, I didn't feel empowered at all. So, you know, there's much more to the story and I can't really get into it, but bear with me. So I'm going to skip here a little bit, but part of my story, you could go and Google Malala Fund, because we all know the story of Malala Yousafzai, right? The young woman was shot by the Taliban for, you know, in retaliation for her advocacy on behalf of girls everywhere who were denied access to education. And basically her site, she's become a spokesperson for this kind of, you know, feminist neoliberal model. And it's all about strengthening economies by producing working women with the potential to add up to $12 trillion to global growth, right? So arguments such as these have been criticized for placing some of the planet's most urgent problems on the frail shoulders of girl children, and for appropriating feminist aspirations of gender equality for the purpose of maximizing corporate profit. Nonetheless, they have radically transformed the landscape of development by fashioning girls as entrepreneurs in waiting, who must be educated not because they have as much right as boys to learn and widen their horizons, but because they're a golden investment opportunity. 3 decades ago, Sharon Stevens alerted us to the ways in which the categories of children at risk and risky children slide into one another in complicated ways. In a way, it paints girls in the global South as simultaneously vulnerable and filled with promise. The millennial development industry is aggressively girling the future, I would argue. By this, I mean that in the utopian schemes articulated by millennial development, girls, not boys, will determine their nation's future trajectory. It is thus through girls that the broader forces of power seek to govern populations and expand markets. Folded in the World Bank's motto that gender equality is quote unquote smart economics, their terms, not mine, are a series of assumptions about women working more efficiently than men and being more fiscally responsible than men. Women are said to be differential, docile, and nimble-fingered, and to work for less. You know that story. They invest more than their income in their families. And when receiving loans, they supposedly are better at paying them back. According to this quote, unquote, evidence-based knowledge, brown girls are ideal. In the decades following Niger's independence in 1960, girls' education was given low priority. It is one of the reasons Niger has one of the lowest literacy rates in the world. After the World Bank, in an effort to re-energize its mission, shifted its attention from infrastructure to individuals, girls' education in Niger and elsewhere, of course, became a critical focus of policy intervention. Adopting the school to the rescue model of development. This is a word I'm borrowing from Amy Stambach, who's written a lot about education in Kenya. Adopting the school to the rescue model of development that cast girls' education as a critical step along a progressive trajectory, NGO representatives and rights activists now unveil initiatives including scholarships, conditional cash transfers, distributions of school supply, new schools, as well as basic school facilities like cleaning water and latrines, and on and on. During campaign visits, workshops, public broadcasts, they flaunt girls' schooling as a solution to many of the social ills, including child marriage. Girls are featured on billboards, advertising loans to parents needing cash to purchase school supplies, and then posters show responsible fathers dropping off their daughters to school and encouraging others to do the same. In the past 2 decades, Niger has seen the numbers of girls attending primary and secondary school consistently rise. Public awareness campaigns have actively disseminated messages that frame school in Niger as a catalyst of national development. Nothing has more impact on a nation than the education of girls, reads a 2015 pamphlet aimed at convincing parents in farming communities in southwestern Niger that sending their daughters to school will benefit not only the girls, but importantly, the entire country. Put otherwise, sending girls to school lays the foundation for effective development in a country that has long ranked at the very bottom of the UN Human Development Index. Now, let me mention that the school as an abstract, idealized, universalized space of learning that is deployed in the promotional messages and images does not look anything like the actual Nigerian schools, which are overcrowded, lack basic infrastructure, and tend to reproduce existing gender inequalities. Although primary education is now mandatory between the ages of 7 and 15 for both girls and boys, school enrollment and attendance remain dismally low. Predictably, those children who will never see the inside of a classroom are more likely to be girls and more likely to be in, rural parts of the country. While primary school participation rests at just 60%, the literacy rate for women between the ages of 15 and 25 is less than 25%, much lower than men's. Far from empowering girls, schools often constitute potentially risky environments for adolescent girls, given the prevalence of sexual harassment and sexual violence. About half of girls adolescent girls in school report having been molested. Half. One of the obstacles to girls accessing Boko, Western knowledge, is a perception that it is incompatible with moral education, what Hausa speakers refer to as tarbiyah. In other words, for many parents, school is actually a space of moral perdition, right? It's not where girls are going to get good values. Many parents prefer sending their daughters to Quranic school, especially at a time when Boko, Western knowledge, has been harshly criticized by conservative religious elites, for whom early marriage, far from harming girls, protects them by providing financial support and respectability, and by ensuring that their fertility is directed towards the production of a lawful, moral progeny. Taking place in a wake of structural adjustments, disastrous failures, the World Bank's shift to women's empowerment was part of what Joseph Stiglitz refers to as second-generation reforms. While economic prescriptions based on a promotion of a free market remained the same, a new development agenda was formulated that centered specifically on women's empowerment. Borrowing heavily from Nobel laureate Amartya Sen's notion that freedom is key to promoting development and sustaining welfare, this agenda was designed to free women in the global South from the restrictive normative institutions, the customs, if you will, that stood in the way of progress. This was a strategic move, given the high moral value that the Western liberal tradition places on the notion of freedom. The multi-pronged development project aimed at empowering women and girls acquired the halo of a humanitarian rescue mission. By blaming cultural traditions, such as early marriage, for underdevelopment, the project conveniently obfuscated the harm inflicted by previous austerity programs that were implemented in the name of fiscal responsibility. In Niger, girls' education became a pillar of the development agenda, just as the proverbial tightening on the belt mandated by neoliberal economic reforms resulted in a precipitous decline in the quality of education, following the evisceration of the public school system in the 1990s. By ostensibly promoting gender parity without passing judgment on broader programs like SAPs that disproportionately harmed women and girls, initiatives centered on female education could build consensus amongst a wide range of stakeholders and accommodate diverse, even contradictory agendas. In the past decade, numerous multinational corporations have teamed up with celebrity activists to launch women's empowerment initiatives that find justification not in the language of gender rights, but in the rhetoric of economic profitability. In an op-ed for Time magazine, U2 frontman and humanitarian Bono wrote that, quote, "The research is clear. Funding girls' education isn't charity, but investment. and the returns are transformational. Closing the gender gap in education could generate 112 billion to 152 billion a year for the economies of developing countries, end of quote. In Niger, the notion of development that predicates the end of poverty on the capitalization of girls is most powerfully evoked in the commonly heard adage, when you educate a woman, you educate an entire nation. Politicians cite the adage to put the accent on the cascading benefits of girls' education. Development workers mention it to mobilize community leaders in the battle against gender discrimination. Adolescent girls themselves reference it when writing about their aspirations to become doctors, lawyers, or judges, and serving their communities. I want to share with you some excerpts from the essays of adolescent girls attending public schools, which I collected almost a decade ago in Dogonduchi. This is one of the songs that in one of the schools I visited, the it's actually a primary school, girls and boys learn and they, recite it at every opportunity. So, quand une fille va à l'école, c'est toute une nation qui grandit. When a girl goes to school, it's the entire country that grows up and matures. So, here's the excerpts from girls. How am I doing on time?
We'll take a few more minutes because then we still have time for some questions.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to read then. I'm just going to let you read, but what I've highlighted certainly, and those are of course translated from the French. But the point is that they've all internalized. Those are lessons they learn, right? This is a lesson, and this is what they're spitting out. So it is all very much about, it's just really striking the way that all of those girls are, just parroting the kind of vision that others created for them. And then there's another one with more quotes. So the trope of the girl embodying the telos of national development that was manufactured by the World Bank and later amplified by a global network of humanitarian and philanthro-capitalist institutions has now seeped into what I call school talk, the language girls learn in the classroom to position themselves as empowered recipients of knowledge, conversant with the multiple issues subsumed under the banner of girls' education. And that's, of course, an umbrella term, right? That references gender equality, access to education, women's empowerment, and so on. Parroting World Bank president, UNICEF representatives, and celebrity activists, schoolgirls write about the generic girl, the girl whose untapped potential must be unleashed by education so that she can pull the country out of poverty. Because after all, as one of the girls put it in her essay, the wealth and development of a country, it's the girl. So they too have adopted that sense that there's this generic girl out there, right? Significantly, the very contradictions on which the girl effect as an amalgam of feminist aspirations and economic quantifications is built, finds their way into the school talk of Nigerian girls. Consider the first 4 verses of this poem by a 10th grader from Dogonduchi. I have the other version that translated in English. Oh, little innocent girl, weakened by ancestral notions, that prevent you from sitting on school benches. You embody the future of the nation. And so the poem reproduces the contradictory representation of schoolgirls as vulnerable, yet also uniquely powerful subjects upon which the girl effect itself is built. It starts with a generic girl and ends with the author here identifying with her suffering subject. The subject is on the one hand culturally constrained, an innocent girl weakened by ancestral notions, and on the other, filled with possibilities and described as the future of the nation. She's the country's best bet in the fight against poverty, yet she's also in need of assistance from donors and investors. In fact, that is precisely that mix of vulnerability and capability that makes her a profitable investment. It's like betting on a weak horse who ends up, first in the race. For Nigerian audiences, the narrative of the vulnerable child bride inevitably conjures up the leaking bodies of fistula patients, women who, as a result of birthing injuries caused by prolonged obstructed labor, suffer from chronic urinary and fecal incontinence. Girls who become pregnant before they're physically mature face higher risks of complication during delivery. And therefore, the whole point of sending them to school is to avoid that terrible fate. So in the Nigerian public's vision of the future, each time you send a girl to school, it's one less fistula patient for the country, right? And of course, by blaming culture for birthing injuries, for women's birthing injuries, they also shift attention from structural inequalities in reproductive health. That is, by drawing the spotlight on early marriage, they conceal the fact that obstetric fistula has more to do with lack of access to medical care than with age. In sum, it is not what fistula and other victimhood narratives explicate that render them useful to an industry seeking to capitalize on poverty, but rather how, through their effective surplus, they render girls both visible and accessible by correlating girlness with both fragility and promise. These narratives do the effective work that capital cannot do to charge girls with speculative futures. And here I'm using Michelle Murphy's language. And of course, that turns them then into socially responsible forms of investment. Firmly anchored at the confluence of salvation and speculation, they function as useful fiction in multiple texts and contexts that range from the glossy reports of the World Bank to the staged performances of UN representatives to the poems of Nigerian schoolgirls. Nested in this contradiction, and there I get to my last point, nested in this contradiction about the girl as both fragile and powerful is another contradiction, which can be summed up as follows. Girls are instrumentalized as ideal neoliberal subjects, driven to improve their lives through a self-centered focus on their studies, their personal goals, and aspirations. And at the same time, they're cast as selfless creatures who are expected to devote their skills, smarts, and energy to make life better for all those around them. Put differently, girls must free themselves from the shackles of culture and all these ancestral notions, and cultivate persona as loci of individualistic agency and desire. They must rely less on others and the government and more on themselves. In sum, their investments with the responsibility for bootstrapping themselves out of poverty. That's the first half. Paradoxically, in a seemingly anti-neoliberal move, but one that resonates with local ways of being and acting as a woman in the world, girls are also expected to improve the standard of living of not just their children, or their immediate kin, but their entire communities. In short, to sacrifice the very atomistic identity education supposedly helped them to cultivate. Recall the schoolgirls who wrote of building two-story houses for their parents. Yeah, one girl says, I'm gonna build a two-story house for my parents. By the way, that's like a palace for by Nigerian standard. So recall those girls who write about, you know, doing all that for their parents, their friends, and everybody else in their village, fighting literacy and in poverty. Adolescent schoolgirls, during conversations I had with them, often displays a strong sense of responsibility to their families and communities. They spoke of wanting to support aging parents, sending them on a pilgrimage to Mecca, paying school fees for younger sisters once they graduated, and building wells for their communities. As such, their future were deeply entangled with the future of others, and by implication, the future of the nation. In sum, by economizing justice-based concepts such as women's empowerment, while also feminizing, or more precisely, girling responsibility, neoliberal governments, organizations have recast adolescent girls as useful props for the activation of a form of human capital that is distinctly neoliberal, yet also not so neoliberal. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, that's wrap up.
Should
Oh,
I?
sure.
Oh, you want me to?
No.
Okay, I'll just give you the last paragraph. So by calling for investment in individual girls, not collective action to combat gender inequities, the rhetoric of female empowerment affords us a glimpse of the twisted logic at work in neoliberal economics. Because the aim is to nurture personal aspirations and channel personal success, development projects are focused on, quote, investing in girls as individuals, not building public school systems. That's Michelle Murphy again. Once educated, however, women are expected to operate differently from typical neoliberal subjects fixated on individual achievements. Rather than working to secure their own financial stability and success, they should reinvest the benefits of their education in their communities, drawing on their newfound agency to improve collective welfare and boost local economies. Thus nested in the globally circulating rhetoric of education as salvation lies a fundamental paradox. Girls, as the personification of national progress, are expected to demonstrate not only individual savvy and strength, but also sacrifice. In the way poverty is tackled through the displacement of social responsibility onto the girl, whose dormant capacities can be harnessed for the benefit of all, it may also be possible to speak of both the making of the girl or the development of the girl and the girling of development. Thank you.
Thank you.